So hello and welcome to everyone to our conversation today on mental health during lockdown. COVID has been a very tricky climate for everyone. People have been adapting in many different ways, adapting their careers, adapting their family dynamics, and generally just having to change their daily routines completely. It's been a huge, challenging time for everyone, and people are dealing with this situation differently. One thing that we feel today is very important to talk about is people's mental health during the pandemic. And especially even recently, we had the Mental Health Awareness Week. So today, our panel will be discussing mental health during this very tricky and testing climate. So just to introduce everyone, when I say hi, give us a wave. We'll start with Chaitanya. So Chaitanya is a psychotherapist and hypnotherapist. She is the head of University of Hertfordshire Counselling Service and has a special interest in Vedic philosophy. So Chaitanya, give us a wave. Next, we've got Puja. Puja is a trainee health psychologist and perinatal mental health coordinator. She works in the private and charity sector, and she recently completed her thesis around maternal mental health. And we've got Tina as well. Tina, if you give us a wave. Tina is a clinical psychologist. She's also known as the Brown psychologist, and works in private practice and has a special interest in South Asian mental health, offering consultation and training to therapists and organizations, as well as specialist individual therapy to South Asian clients. So first of all, I'm going to start off with Puja. So Puja, if you can just talk us through what you do on a daily basis, your sort of daily working routine, and how you've had to adapt to COVID.
Yeah, so I work for a charity in Birmingham, and I'm fortunate that I can work remotely. It's very flexible. The charity is around supporting families going through maternal mental health issues. So my role predominantly is supporting those from a BAME background, so Black, Asian or minority ethnic community. And a lot of my work pre-COVID was working within communities, nurseries, children's centres, schools, just raising awareness around pre and postnatal depression and general health and well-being. So a lot of my role pre-COVID, pre-lockdown, I was out and about in the community a lot. And then I also work within a private sector. So I work within health consultancy. So we deal with various different projects. Yeah.
Thank you. And Tina, if you could just do the same.
Sure, yeah. So I work in private practice, and most of my work is seeing clients face to face. So my huge transition has been to working remotely and online and trying to get used to technology, which is a battle in itself. And then also adapting to the fact that I am 24/7 around my kids. So that is a huge kind of shift and challenge in itself. So working around the kids and also still trying to maintain some sort of private practice. So it's been a huge, huge shift for us.
Sounds like we've had to all make a lot of changes in the current climate. And Chaitanya, can you also just briefly answer the same question as well?
Yeah, sure. So, yeah, as you mentioned, I work as the head of the counselling service at University of Hertfordshire. So I split my time between managing a team of 10 therapists and a few mental health advisors as well. And also seeing some students myself for therapy, for hypnotherapy. I have a small private practice alongside that as well. And yeah, in terms of, you know, with COVID, it was sort of like in a matter of like a week or two, I had to sort of shift everybody, my staff members, to working online and working at home, making sure that those that were high risk as well with their own health had to be, sent home, really quickly and set up really quickly, and also, that the students receive the support as quickly as possible online as well. So yeah, adjusting to working from home has been a challenge, but it's like the kind of new normal now. So yeah, that's what's been going on.
Fine, thank you. And just while we've got you there, Chaitanya, you said you run counselling services for the University of Hertfordshire. There'll be a lot of students watching today, and across the board, students have been affected from primary school all the way to university level. So can you give us an idea how COVID impacted the counselling services for your students?
Well, I think it happened in different ways. I think some students, this kind of global pandemic allowed them to actually put their own issues in some sort of perspective, where actually they realize that, hey, maybe my issue is not as big right now as maybe I felt that they were. And sometimes when we hold something in comparison to something else, we feel differently about it. So, I think for some people that's what happened. And so when we were offering therapy, a lot of students said, you know what, I'm actually okay right now. I'm fine to deal with all of this that's going on, go home, have to, self-isolate at home, be with their family. So they go off campus back home. And they said, I'll come back to counselling if I need it. Some other students that have underlying, anxiety issues, their anxiety increased. The health anxiety, those with OCD, with the hand washing. And then there were students that were self-isolating on campus where they weren't at home, they couldn't go to their families, or, they're international students. Then they're on campus, and then they're having to self-isolate. And that was difficult for some of those students, having to always be in their one room. For a lot of us, we have families, and we're able to self-isolate in a whole house or an apartment, whereas a lot of our students were self-isolating in one room, which is quite difficult. So the university, like the housing services support officers, we sent out care packages and communicating with them online. We started up a self-isolation Facebook support group where we were like giving out resources and doing like online things as well as a whole department. So to give them that kind of remote support. So yeah.
Thank you. And it's actually just made me think now that it's amazing how it's impacted different students so differently, and how people have had to adapt so differently to it. So that in itself is a huge challenge. Something that you mentioned that I want to ask Puja about is a family dynamic aspect. So Puja, you specialize in perinatal mental health, which is combining two areas that can be potentially tricky times to go through individually, even in the normal circumstances. Bringing these things together, can you tell us a bit more about the people that you've been seeing and how they've been coping in the current climate?
Yeah, so like I said earlier, a lot of my role involved working within community settings. Within Birmingham, the South Asian community is massive. It's the second largest ethnicity in Birmingham. So a lot of the communities I'd see or I'd work with were from a South Asian background. And, there's a lot of stigma around mental health. We all know that, especially in our community. So a lot of the families that I'd see, a lot of the moms that I'd speak to, they would be coming for a service without other family members knowing. So obviously when this lockdown happened, everything sort of got shifted to telephone support. And so some moms took that up, and for others that was extremely difficult because they're living with extended family members. There's no sense of privacy. So that was difficult. And we had care packages like you mentioned, Chaitanya. We had things set up for families to use during the lockdown, but in some instances that's just not possible. So I suppose my role was just being that person on the other end of the phone, even if it was for 10 minutes, just to check up on every few days. So yeah, I mean, I think these were very, very testing times for a lot of families. So you could see, even in our referral rates, a lot of numbers had dropped because of that. And that perhaps is across, you know, the whole mental health services anyway. And it's sort of gradually increasing again. So yeah, it took a major blow on a lot of families, and it was very difficult to work with them, to help them. Yeah,
sort of that the family dynamics and how it impacts families differently is so important, and I guess that sort of ties in with a lot of the work that you're doing, Tina, regularly. And I know Puja has mentioned the obvious stigma, the sort of elephant in the room around the Indian culture around mental health. Tina, if I could ask you around sort of, if you could share your thoughts on sort of the stigma in the Indian culture and community, and if you could just talk to us about any thoughts you have on that, and how we can sort of try and improve that slowly.
Big topic. Where do I start? So I think it's, you know, you said it, naming it is firstly part of the issue, isn't it? We have to start to address the fact that mental health does exist. And I think, like, we're finally catching up. I feel like that, you know, as a population in the UK, we're talking about mental health on the regular, which is amazing. You know, from kind of campaigns like ITV, Get Talking on the Couch. So now it's in our living rooms. And it's in our living rooms, but I still feel like it's still that elephant in the room, especially for families who will feel so much shame around, you know, these feelings that they might be feeling, or, you know, wherever they are in their spaces. And, you know, one of the things that I feel very passionate about is about helping people to deconstruct what mental health actually is. And I think that, you know, what mental health and how people within our community see it is, it's this thing that happens to people. And actually we have lost the sort of idea of the whole mind and body integration, and how, you know, I'm sure that Chaitanya will be able to add to this, is the whole sort of trying to understand the full self, you know, in the way that we used to practice holistic medicine. You know, it's ingrained in our roots, isn't it? It's part of what we understand. And I think that when we start to take ownership of that and start to talk about it in that way, rather than a thing that happens to us, there is this sort of, I guess I'm wondering if there is an acceptance of, you know, changing the narrative, changing the way we explain things, so that it feels like it's a thing that we all experience, and that it's on a spectrum, and that we can be healed if the right sort of, you know, circumstances or conditions are there, you know, and it is a collective, joint, systemic issue. You know, it's and I feel that the difficulty we have as South Asians is that because mental health has been constructed on this kind of Western medicalized model, that a lot of South Asians kind of feel like, oh, it's a thing that happens, and, you know, there's this sort of illness about it, which is difficult to then try and heal, or try to kind of take. I think the things that we were talking about was this idea of empowering people to take responsibility for their own health as a whole. So it's a big thing, not an overnight issue that we can kind of tackle, sadly. So, yeah.
No, I know it's a huge topic, and I think you answered that beautifully. It's something that we've all been thinking about for a long time. And one of the things I wanted to touch upon in what you said there is sort of changing the narrative, changing the way we see things. That in itself, when I first learned about Tattva, was one of the main missions that they really stand for, is changing the narrative, sort of generating thought leaders and trying to really change the way we see things. On that point, I'd like to bring in Chaitanya, because I know you have a special interest in Vedic philosophy and the sort of spiritual practice side of things. How can these help us through these current times?
Well, I think what Tina just said was so spot on. You know, actually, what you said, Tina, about this, there's an illness about it, you know, and then, you know, with that comes shame, doesn't it? And I think, you know, South Asians, we come from a collectivistic community, you know, which is different to the West. The West is very individualistic, all about ourselves and our goals and ambitions and the dream. but you know, our culture, the BAME community, we come from a more collectivistic, and so we think about the other. So when we have something going on, we think about how that impacts the other, and so when there is something not understood, and like you said, Tina, like an illness about it, it becomes medicalized, and it's something that we don't understand because we don't see it. We don't see the mind. We don't see mental health issues. You know, it's easy for people to say, I've got diabetes or I've got a broken leg, you know, because it's a physical thing. So there's, you know, with that is there's a lack of understanding, and then a shame, an element of shame and judgment, and so. But you know what Tina was saying about this mind-body connection, you know, a lot of this comes from you know, our sort of root philosophy. You know, the Vedas talks about this, and like you're asking, Harish, is what can we gain from that perspective? Is that, yeah, what it says is that we can't see the mind, the body, and the soul as all separate. You know, we don't go to, so from the Vedic perspective, we don't just go to a physical doctor for the physical body, and we go to a psychologist for the mind, and we go to a spiritual, like a guru for the soul. You know, it's like it all interlinks. And yes, we can do that when we have a specific problem, but in the Vedic philosophy is that, you know, they all interlink. And so if we can change the narrative, like you're saying, about, you know, looking at ourselves, and we have different levels. You know, we have the sort of spiritual self, and then we have the more subtle self, which from the Vedas it's considered that we are, the subtle body is comprised of the intelligence, the mind, and the false ego, and then the physical body. So you know, in terms of the mind and mental health, from the Vedas, it's understood that when we go through experiences, everything that we experience leaves a mental impression on the mind, right? Now, this is in the Western psychology also, right? We're just going to be using different terminology. But in the Vedas, it explain that those impressions are called samskaras, right? So these samskaras are left on the mind. And if those are negative samskaras, then it leaves negative impressions, right? Which then creates the disturbances, the mental disturbances, which then also affect the body. And then you could go into Ayurveda, you know, with that. So, you know, which actually causes an imbalance of the three doshas, right? The Vata, Pitta, Kapha. And so the mental disturbances will then cause a physical disturbances of the airs in the body, and the airs will cause a physical disturbance within those three doshas. So, you know, there's a whole sort of Vedic perspective on this, which, I mean, there's so much there. But yeah, you know, it's not, it doesn't have to be alien, you know, to, especially to South Asians. It's all the information is there. Yeah.
On that point, Chaitanya, the sort of Vedic philosophy side of it is very interesting. For most, it's difficult to approach, and it can be sort of confusing to learn about. But I think the more you get to know about it, the more, and the network you're in, it can become more sort of fluid and easy to access. Relating to the mental health side of things, if people are going through sort of times of trauma and feeling low, do you think these spiritual practices can help people sort of with their consciousness and during these times?
Yeah, of course. You know, I mean, it can help. It can help with of course, with any challenge, especially with isolation, because you know, if you look in the history of the Vedas, right, and Vedic stories, and let's take the most common one that many South Asians will know, like the Mahabharata, right? You know, and actually for spiritual advancement, isolation is necessary. You know, yogis and kings and to be, you know, anyone, grahastas, you know, family members will renounce, you know, their homes and their families when they want to have a spiritual quest, right? So in the Mahabharata, for example, the Pandavas they were exiled, right? But that was the greatest benefit for them spiritually. So we're all we're in a difficult situation, but we can use, you know, our self-isolation, we can use the challenge to go deeper and you know, I mean, it's cliche, but go inwards, right? But when we look at the Vedic perspective, that challenges can give the greatest spiritual gain, because we you know, when we're happy, right, we forget that, you know, we have a deeper self to us, right? We're so immersed in worldly, you know, pleasure. But when we go through challenges, that's when we actually stop and think, hold on a second, what is life? What's the meaning? What's my purpose? Why is this happening? You know, and then we try to find something deeper. So yeah, it can be used for that.
No, thank you. That's a beautiful answer, Chaitanya. And you touched on one of my personal favorite topics, Mahabharata. So that in itself is a huge epic. So we'll move on, I think, because otherwise we could be here for a while.
Yeah, we could be here for a while.
So touch upon some interesting things there, especially in the South Asian communities. Puja, I know when we spoke a while ago, you sort of mentioned about how this affects people in the perinatal mental health, and looking back on it, how things used to work in South Asia, sort of looking at the 40-day rest period. And then when you bring that fast forward into the UK, how this changes massively and you can have sort of conflict between different generations. Could you just briefly explain to our viewers what that rest period is and sort of the difficulties people can have with that?
Yeah, so I suppose a lot of my work actually, you know, whilst I was going into communities, I was the one that was actually learning, because I think it is about being culturally aware around communities and how communities practice things. And, you know, I mean, it's all, you know, it's all great me saying, oh, I'm going to go and raise awareness around what pre and postnatal depression is, when sometimes, you know, people just can't comprehend that. So it's really important. It was really important for me to actually understand, you know, how communities bring up children, you know, what it's like during pregnancy and those sorts of things. And actually, one of the first workshops I did was with a Pakistani group, and it was 3 sort of different age groups within one room. And, you know, I had things that I had to deal with, things like language barrier, because I can't speak, you know, the same language. So we had interpreters in and things like that. And I just thought, you know what, this isn't going to work. All I want to do is hear about their experiences, and what it was like living in villages, and, you know, what it was like bringing up children and stuff. And actually the oldest generation, probably around 60, 70 years of age, was, you know, they were talking about their neighbours were their best friends or family. And everyone would sort of, you know, when there's a new child in the family, everyone sort of gets involved to help them. And the whole idea of the rest period is so that mom can, you know, she can gain some strength again after just having a baby. And the reason for 40 days varied, but generally it was just so that she could, you know, regain her strength and get back to normal. You know, back in those days, they didn't have things like vaccinations and medication, and you know, that was the purpose of it all then. And the other thing that maybe some of you may have heard of is, in some communities, particularly in the Gujarati community, you don't wash your hair for 7 months when you're pregnant with your first child. And I always used to question why this was, like, why has my cousin got greasy hair? Like, you know, why? And it's because, you know, back in the days, people would go and bathe in the river. So they'd be bending forward to wash their hair, you know, causing damage, pain, those sorts of things. And again, there's loads of variations, but all these practices are for practical reasons. And I think in sort of fast forward, like, you know, into our generation, they're still practiced within certain communities. And I think if you're open as a mom to that's fine. But if you're not, and when those practices are sort of, you know, really forced upon you, I think that's when problems can start. And that's the sort of stuff that we would see within our service, you know, really enforce cultural practices. So it can be quite, you know, that's why it was quite challenging working with families who, you know, there's a generational gap, you know, within a family dynamic, and those are the sort of practical problems that we'd have to sort of work with and help, you know, the new mum understand what was going on and why it's going on. And again, it is all about cultural awareness. I think it's really important to be proactive and listen to people's stories and listen to why the older generation do this, that, and the other, and take time out to do that, because then as professionals we can understand it better, especially if it's coming from our own community. So yeah, I hope, did I answer your question?
Yeah, that was it was nice to hear that, because a lot of people may not even be aware of what that is. So thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
On that note, I think we have one mother in the group at the moment, certainly not me. Tina, you're a mother of two. So just, if you could just give us your insight on how the lockdown's been with the kids and any other previous experiences that you've had, if you,
Yeah, so lockdown it's been interesting, because I think as a family we have really got to know each other, and it's weird because I think that you forget how fast paced our lives are. You know, we get up in the morning, we're brushing our teeth, trying to get our uniforms on, and we have to be out of the house by a certain time. We've got to meet the school bell, and then I'm rushing to the office, and I'm seeing my clients, and then I'm rushing back home. Got to cook the dinner, feed the kids, and then they need to go back to bed. So I think what this whole lockdown period has allowed us to do as a family is slow down. And that's been an absolute blessing, you know. And what I found is that I've got to know my children in a deeper way. It's been so amazing to just watch their, you know, and see their interaction, because obviously they spend time with each other, but they don't spend time with each other at school. They're both different ages. And I think that what this has allowed us to do as a family is just observe each other, be in each other's company. Don't get me wrong, it's not always rosy. We do get frustrated with each other. We often get toys thrown at each other. You know, it's chaos at the best of times. But what it's helped us to do is it's helped us to strip away from the pressures of everyday life. So we are a very social family. We've got a massive, like my in-laws, there's a huge family around them, and I've got a fairly big kind of close-knit family as well. So every weekend we always have something on. And actually what we've noticed is how relaxed we are, that we've kind of been able to do things in the garden, we've played with our children. You know, there's this sense of, you know, moments of like, we're not having to go anywhere. And don't get me wrong, you know, there are times where I'm totally losing my mind because, you know, toys are everywhere and, you know, it's chaos, and that's life, but that's how it is, you know, pre-COVID. So what it's done is it's brought us together in a way, and we've kind of made time for board games, and we've actually adopted a kitten. So that's been really lovely, you know, and it's almost kind of just really gelled us as a family, and it's really nice. But then at the same time, I think what we've realized is how important the extended family are, and how badly the children and also you know, the grandparents miss the grandchildren. And for me, I think that's the most heartbreaking part of this whole scenario, is how, you know, you'll do a Zoom call with the grandparents and they'll be just like, oh, you know, we really miss you, and you know, even if they're kind of doing a social distance kind of like wave drive-by type thing, they just want to hug the kids. And you know, I just think to myself that actually that's what we crave as human beings. We crave presence and touch. And you know, I think to all those, you know, people that don't have that or aren't able to have that I just think, gosh, that must be so difficult, because you know, the kids massively keep us grounded, and they keep us thinking about, you know, what's it like to be in the moment. Don't get me wrong, I've had points during this time of how am I going to cope, how's my practice going to run, and you get that, and that's of course natural. But what I've been able to do is to just be with my children, and they have been that blessing, to kind of almost just remind me of, what's it like to be right here, right now, present. And that has been, just phenomenal, really.
Thanks for that. I think being present in the moment and the positives of having the family together, but on the other side of it, there are people alone in isolation, and the previous podcast mentioned it beautifully about how people grieve in isolation. I can totally resonate with some of what you just said there, Tina, because currently I'm a junior doctor on a COVID ward, and like a lot of the stuff that Chaitanya's mentioned around the spiritual aspects of it, there's a lot of people that are having to die in isolation, unfortunately, and it can be very difficult having to go through that alone and not be able to have the human touch of the aspect of the family there, the lack of that, which is very difficult. And I guess that links in with all the sort of spiritual side of it, how tricky that is.
It's such a cruel virus in that sense, that people are having to die without family members around, being able to offer whatever their prayers, their love, but I chimed in because I wanted to ask you, Harish, how have you found working on the ward with COVID?
So it's been difficult. One of the sort of reasons for my motivation behind this topic was that my previous rotation was on psychiatry. So I've sort of learned a lot about psychiatry, worked with people like yourselves, and got a huge insight into how much you guys do and what really goes on. And then COVID came, a lot of us got redeployed to COVID wards. So I was on a geriatric COVID ward, and at the best of times, the sort of prognosis for geriatrics isn't great. But during a time of COVID, it sort of heightened. And one thing that really struck with me was that all that we've sort of spoken about is a community aspect, and the family feel is so huge, because you go to the wards and there's no visitors, there's no families, and it's very quiet, and it's very sort of a shock to this system because it's something that we're not used to. And it has been very difficult. But on the flip side of it, some of the positives that we've been able to get out of communication is through like sort of social media and Zoom and WhatsApp and Google, that in this climate we're able to connect with people, so people can speak to their relatives, speak to their family. Lots of healthcare professionals have been facilitating this, which has been good. I think sort of a few hundred years ago, and even sort of during the Spanish flu and a few of those other tricky pandemics, technology wasn't around, and it was a very difficult time back then. So we're quite fortunate in that sense. But it has been difficult. I sort of wanted to talk to you again, Puja, about, you sort of mentioned, we've all touched upon the community aspect of things and bridging the gap at a community level. You do quite a lot of community work. Can you tell us about some of the initiatives that you guys take and how effective they can be?
Yeah, so I suppose it's part of my role, but also outside of work, I'm affiliated with other organisations. So I've always had that opportunity to work in the community. I've kind of grown up in that environment. My parents are quite, and brother, quite heavily involved within community, events and things like that. So I've been quite fortunate in that sense anyway. And I suppose just before lockdown, actually, my mom's part of this yoga group, and every Friday they do like an hour's worth of yoga or whatever, and then they chat for like 45 minutes after. They just have a good natter. It's just a ladies group, and I thought, oh, this is like a perfect opportunity for me to tap into and find out what they actually do. And so I just thought, you know what, let me just go in one day and we'll just do a discussion around stress and anxiety and management techniques, because I thought that would fit quite well with, you know, yoga. And it was brilliant. I think, you know, for a lot of people, I mean, for us, talking about stress, anxiety, depression, it's like second nature. You know, we hear it all the time, right? Mm-hmm. For a lot of people, it's not like that. So, and especially in our community where those sorts of things are quite, you know, hidden. And, you know, we just did a little session on what stress would look like and how, you know, physiologically it would look like and how to cope with it. And how yogasan's good for it as well. So again, that was pre-COVID, you know, pre-COVID, pre-lockdown, and I did have a few more things lined up like that. And it is just about tapping into spaces where you feel, okay, you know, it'll be safe to do that. And I think I spoke to Tina when I was going to do it. And, you know, just if you got the fire in your belly to talk about something like this, just go out and do it. Do your research, speak to some people, and just start raising a little bit more awareness in areas that you think, you know, people might benefit from. I'm a little bit more sort of, I would rather just go out and do something, and then see how it goes and then adapt it and change it as it goes on. That is kind of my way of working. So yeah, I feel like that might be the, you know, even tapping into faith-based communities. So like the Mandir, I know one of our local Mandir does talks on diabetes awareness. So why not tap in and talk about something related to stress management at the same time? So there are opportunities and there are ways, and it's just about ways of finding out what's going on. So yeah.
I think that's a beautiful answer there, Puja. The fact that when we talk about these topics, it seems like such an uphill challenge, and it seems so difficult to break stigma and talk about these really like sort of difficult topics. But the fact that you went into the sort of your mum's yoga class after the session and something so simple, just talking to them after that, it almost gives that human touch, and it makes it like the sense that we can all do this. It's not that hard. And that's something that I know, Tina, you do a lot of in your own time, and the sort of easy steps that we can do. It's not like we have to all fly to the moon and back with NASA or something. This is really sort of simple steps that we have to take. And I know that Chaitanya and Tina do a lot of this stuff already in their own time. Something that really resonated with me was, Tina, when you mentioned that you did a talk in the local Samaj once around one of the common mental health conditions. I think our viewers would really benefit from that experience if you could share that with us.
Yeah. So so I got asked by my mother-in-law, who's quite active in the Mistry Samaj, and she said, "Oh, can you do a talk on depression?" I was like, "Okay." And she said, "Oh, it's for her Mahela Sammelan." I was like, "Okay." And she said, "There's going to be about 1,000 women there." I was like, "Okay." And she said, "Would you mind doing it in Gujarati?" And I was like, "Okay." So, you know, my nerves were kind of getting higher and higher, but I thought, you know what, it needs to be done. And I think my Nivani was probably about 2 months old at the time, or 3 months old, something ridiculous. So yeah, hormonal postnatal woman, you know, that came on and did a talk on depression. And like, you know, again, it was just simple. I broke down concepts, and, you know, it was so powerful, I think, because when I asked about, you know, what happens when we're feeling low and depressed, I didn't want to use too many of the kind of labels around depression, but I was talking about kind of how it feels, how rough it feels, how low it feels, how at times you feel so low you no longer want to be around anymore. And I remember sharing that with the women, with the help of my interpreter mother-in-law. She was amazing, because I was like, "Help me out." She was like interpreting for me. And I asked that question around, you know, have you ever felt so bad that you just don't want to be here anymore? And I put my hand up because I've been there, you know, and I kind of did that. And as I looked around, there were hands being raised. And that moment for me was goosebump moments, because I thought, this is why I do this. That yes, there were some women that were brave enough to put their hand up and say, "I felt this low, I felt this rough, I felt, these feelings. And, you know, that's hugely empowering. And, you know, what I got at the end of that was lots of feedback of, wow, this was so interesting, and, you know, really loved your talk, blah, 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 blah. And people were interested in therapy. And I could see that there was a barrier at that point, you know, that women would come to, oh, my friend needs some help. And there would be that kind of like, you know, conversation turn up. And I thought, actually, this, you know, the whole idea of therapy and our communities, it just, something just doesn't quite stick with that. And I left that because obviously I was still on maternity and stuff. But what it left me with is that feeling of we need to do better. We need to think a bit differently about the way that we construct mental health within our communities. You know, that we need to work not from outside in, but within, you know, and help. I think we need the education, you know, and we need to, like you were saying, Harish, bridging the gap. It is about bringing our knowledge, but also utilizing the skills and the knowledge that our communities have already and empowering them. Because my understanding is that a lot of the empowerment has been stripped away. And this is through, you know, stuff that's happened in the past, colonization, whitewashing of therapy, all of that stuff that's happened. And if we can go into our communities like what Puja does, which is to just be and listen and observe and not tell people how it should or shouldn't be done, you know, people will open up. And it is about trust, you know. I think that one of the biggest issues that we face as professionals is that fear. And, you know, we touched on this before about confidentiality and, oh, well, if she's, you know, she's in my samaj, she might tell so-and-so and so-and-so. And actually, what we need to be helping people is that we are professionals and that we are we're accountable, aren't we, to our codes of practice. So it is a very chip away kind of ongoing project. And I think that one of the key things that I've taken away from starting that work from then is about bringing people together, having these conversations and doing it as a collective. Because, you know, I could kind of do work in isolation, but I'll only be kind of working with the small subsection of a community, and I might not be effectively meeting the needs of everybody. What we need to be doing is bringing all our heads together and all our experiences and all our knowledge, because everyone's going to bring something to the table, you know. And you know, as I was mentioning to you, Harish, it's holistic, isn't it? Your skills are just as valuable as anybody else's. So it is about bringing and sharing and co-creating our identity and our understanding of mental health.
And I think that the fact that if we all sort of widen it to the community like you guys all do, then more people will be like yourself, Tina, and be brave and courageous and stand up on stage in front of 1,000 women and talk about the issues that they've gone through. Because I personally struggle to talk about anything if it was difficult for me, and I'm sure most people out there in the community would really struggle with that idea of talking to 1,000 people on stage. So kudos to you for A, doing that, and B, sharing that experience. On that point, Chaitanya, sort of, could you highlight some areas of sort of coping strategies and areas in the community that we can get involved with, and sort of that you're already involved with, and how effective they are?
I mean, well, one thing that I do is I have been doing within the Krishna consciousness community. At least that's been the platform that's been putting out these workshops, just on psychoeducation. You know, like understanding what the mind is, understanding what mental health is, understanding that you know, these issues are, you know, one is able to overcome them, one is able to understand what's going on inside and change. It doesn't have to be you know, like a life sentence, these issues. You know, as Tina I think said before, like, it's not something that happens to us. You know, we have a mind, we have a body, you know, and we've gone through things, and so in understanding how the mind works and how we can remedy and heal past traumas and heal from pain, it's to know that it's possible. It is possible. And a part of some of the work that I do is psychoeducational, like, when I do workshops at least. And then, within the therapy, it's about then looking at what in somebody's individual issue is. A lot of the times it's really related to, I've gone through XYZ in the past, and on a subconscious level, right, it's still impacting and manifesting in mental dis-ease, right? And so a lot of the times it's understanding what, how to manage our thoughts, how to undo negative thinking, how to undo unhelpful beliefs, how to heal from these traumas, how to release our emotions and understand what emotions are. A lot of the time people don't understand how to manage their emotions, how to manage anxiety. So it's like these skills, these skills development, and then gaining a healthier perspective on life and a healthier perception on yourself, on life, finding a meaning to your life, finding a purpose. So there's so many elements that can help somebody. Yeah.
That was really powerful. I think these workshops and all the things that we've been doing are so effective on different levels. I think touching from what you just said and what Tina said, and especially what Puja said, resonates, that it can be at community level or whether it's at a personal level.
Harish, I just thought of something else. Coming to a therapist, a psychologist, like all three of us are, psychologists, psychotherapists, I just want to kind of say this, that because I think, in the South Asian community, I think the common understanding of counselling is I come to somebody and I tell them my secret, right? And then there's, I don't know whether are they going to keep this to themselves. And like Tina, you mentioned about confidentiality, like we are all bound by a code of ethics. If we were to break confidentiality inappropriately, our licenses would be revoked, right? We would lose our jobs. So we don't work in that way. And then the other thing is about, therapy is about change. That if one comes into therapy, it's about really being able to come to a place of, okay, I want to understand myself, I want to understand what's going on, and I want to be able to create change in my life so I don't feel like this anymore, so I don't have these symptoms, so I don't have to be labeled as a schizophrenic or a depressed person. And that's the work that we all do. We help the individual create change and heal, from what they're going through. And so it's not only about just coming in and having a chat or talking. We are trained in a way that we're able to assist change on a psychological level. Yeah.
No, I think that's nice, and that brings in Tina, if I could just ask you on that level, could you just sort of, it's quite a deep topic, but if you could just briefly sort of explain Chaitanya's answer further on the levels of people, the way you change people on the terms of different levels.
Yeah. So for me, as I've kind of grown in experience throughout my years of practicing, it is about acknowledging the varying sort of levels that can impact a person. So I have now, in the recent kind of 2-3 years, I've really started to understand that actually we are not just an individual living in isolation in this little bubble where nothing can affect us. We are part of families, we are part of systems, communities, we are part of cultural systems, all of this stuff. And what I found is that a lot of the issues that my clients come with often are to do with stuff that is out of their control. and they may be experiencing things that feel quite invisible or feel quite powerful. So, for example, if I'm working with women, I am not afraid to talk about patriarchy. If I'm working with a Black woman, I will not be afraid to talk about what is it like to be a Black woman right now? Like, how is that affecting you? So racism, I will be talking about, all of these big issues that often we don't think, what's that got to do with mental health? People often don't understand the link, but actually the link is so real. It's impacting us on so many different levels. And if we don't start naming them, we are going to continue to go around in circles. We need to be starting to dismantle these sort of systems that are keeping us in this state of oppression, especially as people of color. So for me, I like to just say it as it is, and I will kind of be very honest and curious and open about these conversations. So if we don't start naming these things, then what are we doing? We're silencing and continuing this issue that is kind of happening. That we need to be addressing poverty, we need to be addressing, sexism, racism, all of that stuff. It has to happen. It's part of being a human being.
No, I really like that. I think that's a lovely place to wrap up this huge topic. Just want to go around and get your final thoughts on this current climate and the lockdown period. So if we can start with Puja, please.
Yeah, I suppose, just to wrap up, we've put a lot of pressure on ourselves, I think, as a community. And this is, why people sometimes may develop anxieties and stress. And so just be present, sit in your garden, have a coffee, listen to the birds. If you've got a garden, just take some time out and know what it's like to be on your own. Even if there's people around you. I think that's really, really important. So that's my thoughts during this period, just to kind of give yourself some time.
Brilliant. And Chaitanya?
That's really nice. What Puja said, it's really nice. I think yes. I think we need to be patient. I think we really need to be patient. I think even myself getting a little bit like, when is this going to end? I want to go back to some sort of normality in one sense as to what my life was. So I think we need patience, but I also kind of think I want to take it a little step further, which is, if we can be a little bit self-reflective as well and think about what can I gain from this? Can I, what have I learned? What can I gain? How can this experience change my life for the better? What can I take away? Whether that is appreciating family members, appreciating friends, or starting to pick up new skills and new habits. To take the time to self-reflect and gain from something quite tragic. Yeah.
No, I think that's really important. Self-reflection in a climate like this is so important. And Tina as well, please.
Oh, I've got lots of things I could say, but I won't, because we'll be here all night. I think what popped into my head were a few things. So firstly, connection, because that's what humans crave, don't we? We crave that connection in some sense, this idea that, this meeting of minds, like this, for example, it's connection, isn't it? And it's wonderful to be alongside some minds that think like us, right? Isn't that amazing? And I love that. And I think that that's why social media has really just blossomed, hasn't it? It's been a lifesaver for many people. And then I wanted to kind of raise the idea of checking our privilege, because we're all kind of handling different things at different times. And I love this analogy that I think my husband even said, which is quite surprising for him. He said that we're all in this ocean, and this ocean is rough. It's a rough sea. We're not in the same boat. We're in different boats. to remind yourself that your boat might be different to what somebody else's might look like, and we just need to hold that and bear that.
May I add something there?
Yeah,
One thing that me and two of my friends have been doing every single night is just a gratitude list of very, very, basic things, like I'm so grateful for a bed tonight. And that just, you just go to sleep with a lot of gratitude and wake up with a lot of gratitude. So I think that's a really useful exercise if anyone's experiencing any kind of stress or anxiety at the moment.
I think that's a beautiful place to end, Puja, that the simple things that we can take for granted, being grateful and having gratitude and sort of the compassion for those really, really simple things is very important. I want to thank all of our panel today who have come together and have shared their thoughts on a very difficult topic. It's almost as broad as the Mahabharata, Chaitanya, I think. We've spoken about sort of bridging the gap in the community, the stuff that you do with the perinatal aspect of it with the mums, and the sort of the stuff that you guys do as psychologists as well. It's huge, and these are tricky topics, and I'm sure that today's conversation has been very insightful, and hopefully this should shed some light on these very tricky topics. And like Tina said, this isn't the solution or the end of it. Hopefully we can build upon these difficult conversations and take it into our communities and hopefully empower one another and help one another through it. And hopefully one day soon we can get back together, maybe meet each other face to face and do this even face to face live. And just want to leave the sort of our viewers with one thing, is that please, during these difficult times, keep in touch with family, friends, stay healthy and look after each other. And because it has been such a sort of powerful topic, I want to leave the viewers with one powerful quote from J.K. Rowling, who's one of my personal favorite authors. And she once said that rock bottom became the solid foundation on which I rebuilt my life. That was rock bottom became the solid foundation on which I rebuilt my life. So drawing parallels to COVID, it's been a very, very difficult time, but there is always light at the end of the tunnel, and hopefully we can go forwards and build upon that. Thank you all for listening today, and thanks to our panel again. Thank you.
Thank you.